I woke up feeling something strange on my head. It was the day of Thomas's wedding, my only son, and it should have been the happiest moment for me as a mother. But something was terribly wrong. I instinctively reached for my head and felt nothing. Smooth, cool skin, completely bare. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I ran to the bathroom mirror and what I saw left me paralyzed. My hair, that ash blonde with silver highlights that I'd cared for over 63 years, was completely gone. Not a single strand remained. It was as if someone had taken a razor to my entire head while I slept. Tears began to flow uncontrollably. It wasn't just the shock of seeing myself bald, it was the profound humiliation it represented. Today was the day my son would marry Rebecca, that woman who from day one had treated me like I was an inconvenience, an old piece of furniture taking up space in her perfect new life. That's when I saw it, a folded piece of paper on the nightstand that hadn't been there the night before. With trembling hands, I unfolded it and read the words that would be forever etched in my memory. Now you have the look you deserve, ridiculous old lady. Enjoy the wedding. The note fell from my hands like a dead leaf. I sat on the edge of the bed feeling as if I'd been hollowed out. It wasn't just my hair I had lost that morning. It was the last drop of dignity I had left in this house that had once been my home. I remembered all the times Rebecca had made comments about my appearance. Eleanor, don't you think that color ages you? Or maybe you should consider a more modern look. Always with that fake smile that never reached her eyes. Always with Thomas beside her, nodding like a puppet. My son, my Thomas, the boy I had raised alone after his father died when he was only 10 years old. The same boy for whom I had worked day and night to build the furniture company that was now one of the most important in the country. The same company whose 40% of shares I planned to transfer to him today after the ceremony as a wedding gift. I stood up and walked to the closet. I had to decide what to do. I could stay home, pretend to be sick, avoid public humiliation. But that would be exactly what Rebecca wanted. She wanted me to hide, to disappear from her perfect day. As I searched through my dresses, my mind flew back to that day 3 years ago when Thomas introduced me to Rebecca for the first time. It was at an upscale restaurant downtown. She arrived late, without apologizing, and throughout dinner she talked exclusively about herself. Her career plans as an interior designer, her travels, her vision of life. Not a single question about me. Not a single gesture of interest in getting to know the mother of the man she supposedly loved. How could I have known that 3 years later, this same woman would enter my bedroom while I slept to cut off my hair and humiliate me on the most important day in my son's life? The doorbell pulled me from my thoughts. It was my stylist, whom I'd called urgently. When she saw my bald head, her eyes widened in shock. "Eleanor, dear, what happened?" she asked with genuine concern. "A little accident," I lied. "I need you to help me look presentable for my son's wedding." As she worked on fitting me with a perfectly styled wig, I looked at myself in the mirror and made a decision. I would go to that wedding. I would smile. I would congratulate the couple and give my speech during the toast. But something had changed inside me that morning. Something Rebecca hadn't calculated when she decided to humiliate me. What she didn't know was that that morning she hadn't just taken my hair. She had cut the last thread that tied me to a life of blind sacrifices for a son who no longer respected me. And as my stylist finished adjusting the wig, I wondered, did Thomas and Rebecca really deserve the gift I had planned to give them? I looked at myself in the mirror one more time. The woman looking back at me appeared to be me, but something in her eyes had changed. There was a determination I hadn't seen in years. A fire I thought had been extinguished. Perhaps, after all, this accident would be the best thing that could have happened to me. As the taxi took me to the church, memories flooded my mind. It was strange how in the most painful moments, your brain decides to show you exactly everything you've lost. I remembered the day Stanley, my husband, died. Thomas was barely 10 years old, and I was 33. The doctor told me it had been a massive heart attack, that there was nothing they could have done. At that moment, standing in that cold hospital hallway, All I could think was, how am I going to raise Thomas alone? Stanley had been the creative brain behind our small furniture factory. I barely knew how to handle the basic accounting for the business. But that night after the funeral, when Thomas fell asleep crying in my arms, I made a decision that would change our lives forever. I would never let my son feel financial insecurity. The first years were brutal. I worked from 5 in the morning until 11 at night. I learned about furniture design, about suppliers, about business management. I made mistakes that cost me thousands of dollars. But each mistake taught me something new. Thomas never knew about the nights I stayed awake, calculating if we would have enough money for his school books or his sports uniforms. By the time he turned 18, our company was already one of the most important in the region. By the time he graduated from college, we were millionaires. But Thomas never asked how that had happened. To him, the money had simply appeared as something natural, something he deserved by birthright. "Mom, I need money for the apartment," he would tell me at 25. "Mom, Rebecca and I want to take a trip to Bali," he would inform me at 30. It was never a request, it was always a statement, as if my money was automatically his. And I gave it to him each time because I thought that was my responsibility as a mother. I had worked so hard to give him a comfortable life that I forgot to teach him the value of work, of effort, of sacrifice. Rebecca's arrival only made things worse. From day one, she behaved as if she owned the house, as if I were an uncomfortable guest in my own family. "Eleanor, don't you think Thomas and I need more privacy?" she asked me one day during dinner. "Maybe it would be good for you to consider moving somewhere smaller, more appropriate for a woman your age." Thomas said nothing. He just sat there cutting his meat as if he hadn't heard his fiancée suggest that I should leave the house I had bought and paid for with my own work. But what hurt the most wasn't her direct comments, but the subtle way they excluded me from their lives. The family dinners where they talked only to each other, as if I wasn't present. The conversations that abruptly stopped when I entered the room. The knowing looks they exchanged when I spoke, as if I were a confused old woman who didn't understand how the modern world worked. The taxi stopped in front of the church, bringing me back to the present. I paid the driver and got out carefully, trying not to disturb my wig. I had arrived an hour before the ceremony, intentionally. I wanted time to calm down and prepare my heart for what was coming. The church was being decorated with white and gold flowers. Everything was elegant, expensive, perfect, exactly as Rebecca had dreamed. I sat in one of the back pews watching the workers place the final details when I heard familiar voices coming from the side vestibule. It was Thomas talking to someone on the phone. His voice sounded tense, worried. "No, you can't come now," he was saying. "The ceremony is in an hour. We'll talk after the honeymoon, I promise." Something in his tone made me stand up and walk silently toward where his voice was coming from. He was hidden behind a column, with his back to me. "Yes, I know it's difficult to keep it secret," he continued. "But once we have Mom's shares, everything will be different. We can be together without having to hide." I felt as if someone had punched me in the stomach. What shares was he talking about? And who did he want to be with without hiding? "Listen, Amanda," Thomas went on, and my world completely shattered. "After today, everything will change. Mom is going to transfer 40% of the company's shares. With that control, we can do whatever we want. I just need you to be patient for a few more weeks." Amanda. I knew that name. She was the former design assistant at our company, a woman with whom my son apparently had a secret relationship while preparing to marry Rebecca. I moved closer, my heart beating so hard I feared he might hear me. "Rebecca doesn't suspect anything," Thomas continued. "She's so obsessed with this perfect wedding that she doesn't notice anything else. And Mom, well, Mom is so desperate to please me that she'd do anything to see me happy." Those words cut through me like knives. Desperate to please him. Is that how my own son saw me? "No, I don't feel bad about this," Thomas said, obviously responding to something Amanda had asked him. "Rebecca knew exactly what she was doing when she got involved with me. She just wants the shares too. It's a marriage of convenience for both of us." And Mom, she's had a good life. It's time for her to enjoy her retirement without worrying about the company. Retirement? As if I were an employee who had fulfilled her service time and could now be discarded with a small pension. The conversation continued, and each word was worse than the last. Thomas had planned all of this. The marriage to Rebecca was a sham to get my shares. His relationship with Amanda was real, but secret until he had the resources to divorce and start a new life. After the transfer, we'll wait a few months, Thomas was explaining with a coldness I didn't recognize in my son. We'll tell Mom that Rebecca and I need space, that we want to run the company alone. Eventually, we'll convince her to move into a retirement home. She's 63. It's perfectly normal. A retirement home? They wanted to get rid of me completely. I heard footsteps approaching and quickly moved away, pretending to be checking the altar flowers. Thomas appeared a few minutes later, smiling, acting like the nervous but happy groom. Mom, he said, kissing me on the cheek. You look beautiful. That hairstyle suits you perfectly. I looked into his eyes, those eyes that had once belonged to my innocent little boy, and now I only saw a stranger. A stranger who had meticulously planned how to use me, and then discard me. Thank you, son, I replied with the fakest smile of my life. I'm very excited for your special day. Thomas hugged me, and for a moment I felt the urge to confront him, to ask him how he had become this person. But something held me back. Maybe it was survival instinct, or maybe it was that for the first time in my life, I was seeing the situation with absolute clarity. Where's Rebecca? I asked, trying to sound casual. In the preparation room with the bridesmaids, Thomas replied. She's a little stressed, you know how brides are? Stressed. If she knew what I had just discovered, she would be more than stressed. I think I'll go give her my best wishes, I said, and Thomas nodded absent-mindedly before walking away to talk to the priest. I walked toward the preparation room with shaking legs. I didn't know exactly what I expected to find there, but I needed to see Rebecca. I needed to understand if she was also being deceived or if she was part of the plan. What I didn't imagine was that I was about to discover an even deeper betrayal than I thought. The preparation room door was ajar, and I could hear laughter and animated conversations. I approached silently and heard Rebecca's voice with perfect clarity. Girls, in a few months I'll be officially rich and free, she said between laughs. Thomas has no idea that I've already contacted a divorce lawyer. With community property laws, I'm entitled to half of everything, including the shares we'll receive today. My legs almost gave way. Rebecca had a plan too. She was also using Thomas. And the old lady? Asked one of her friends, laughing. Eleanor will be easy to handle, Rebecca replied with contempt. I already have her eating out of my hand. After the share transfer, we'll convince Thomas to put her in some facility. That woman has lived too long thinking she owns everything. The laughter that followed sounded to me like hyenas, celebrating over a carcass. And by the way, what happened with the plan for this morning? Asked another voice. Oh, it was perfect, Rebecca replied, and I could imagine her cruel smile. I went into her room at 4 in the morning. She was completely asleep. I cut off all her hair and left her a note. You should have seen how she looked, like a pathetic bowling ball. More laughter. How could they be so cruel, so cold? It was almost impossible to comprehend. Don't you think that's too much? Someone asked with a hesitant voice. She is Thomas's mother, after all. She's a controlling old woman who doesn't know when to step aside, Rebecca replied firmly. Besides, it's important that she understands who's in charge now. If she shows up at the wedding, she'll be publicly humiliated. If she doesn't show up, everyone will know she doesn't support her son. I win either way. I backed away from the room, feeling like I was in a nightmare. My son was betraying me with another woman. My daughter-in-law was using me to get the company shares and then divorce. And I, the foolish 63-year-old, had been about to hand over 40% of the shares on a silver platter. But now I knew everything, and they had no idea that I knew. I sat in my car in the church parking lot, hands trembling as I held my phone. My entire world had collapsed in a matter of minutes. but strangely enough, for the first time in years, I felt completely lucid. I dialed my lawyer's number, William Parker, who had been my trusted legal partner for the past 20 years. He answered on the second ring. Eleanor, how are you? Everything ready for the big transfer this afternoon? William, I need you to immediately cancel the scheduled transfer, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause. Are you sure? The documents are already prepared. We just need your signature after the ceremony. Completely sure, and I need you to come to my house early tomorrow. We have to make some important changes to my will. Of course, Eleanor. Has something happened? Let's just say I've had a very enlightening revelation about my family. After hanging up, I sat in silence, watching the guests arrive at the church, entire families dressed elegantly. Friends of Thomas and Rebecca, people I had known for years. They all came to celebrate what they thought was a union of love, without knowing they were witnessing the most elaborate farce of their lives. But I knew the truth, and now I had to decide what to do with that information. I could confront Thomas directly, tell him I'd overheard his conversation. I could talk to Rebecca and reveal that I knew about her divorce plans. I could cancel the wedding completely and expose them both in front of all the guests. But as I considered these options, I realized that none would give me the satisfaction I needed. They had spent months, maybe years, planning how to use me and discard me. They deserved something more creative. I returned to the church just as the ceremony was beginning. I walked down the center aisle to my seat in the first row, smiling and greeting acquaintances as if I were the happiest mother in the world. Thomas saw me arrive and smiled nervously. Rebecca, radiant in her $15,000 French lace dress, gave me a small nod. How perfect they both looked. How convincing in their roles as loving bride and groom. Throughout the ceremony, while the priest talked about love, trust, and fidelity in marriage, I was planning my next move. I listened to the promises Thomas and Rebecca were making, promises I knew neither of them intended to keep, and felt a strange calm take over me. Does anyone know of any reason why this couple should not be joined in marriage? The priest asked with traditional formality. For a moment, I considered standing up. I imagined the shocked faces, the chaos that would ensue, the instant humiliation of them both. But I remained silent. I had something better planned. When the priest declared them husband and wife, I applauded along with everyone else. When Thomas kissed Rebecca, I smiled like the proud mother everyone expected to see. And when the newlyweds began to walk down the aisle, I stood up and followed them toward the church exit. At that moment, as people threw rose petals over the newlyweds, no one could imagine what was really going through my head. No one could know that beneath my serene smile was a woman who had just awakened from a long lethargy, a woman who was no longer willing to be used and discarded like an old piece of furniture. What Thomas and Rebecca didn't know was that their perfect plan was about to collapse, and I would be the one to knock down the first domino piece. At the reception, I behaved like the perfect hostess. I greeted all the guests. I made comments about how beautiful Rebecca looked, how happy Thomas looked. I danced with my son when he invited me. I told him how proud I was of him. Mom, it means everything to me that you're here, Thomas told me as we danced. I know things have been a bit tense lately, but I want you to know that I love you. I looked into his eyes, those eyes that had lied so easily on the phone just hours before. I love you too, son. I always will, no matter what happens. He smiled, probably thinking I was referring to my acceptance of Rebecca. He had no idea I was referring to what I was about to do. When the time for the toast came, Thomas approached me with a glass of champagne. Mom, would you like to say a few words? Of course, son. It would be an honor. Thomas called for silence, and all the guests turned their attention to me. Rebecca smiled at me from the head table, that fake smile she had perfected over 3 years. Thomas took my hand, playing his role of devoted son perfectly. Thank you all for joining us on this special day, I began, my voice clear and strong, resonating throughout the hall. As Thomas's mother, I cannot express how excited I am to see my son marry the woman he loves. There were applause and murmurs of approval. Rebecca blushed convincingly. Thomas squeezed my hand affectionately. 33 years ago, when Thomas was born, I promised that I would always protect him, that I would always put his well-being before mine. And throughout all these years, I have kept that promise. More applause. The audience was completely captivated. Today, as a special wedding gift, I had planned to transfer 40% of our family company's shares to the newlyweds' account. A murmur of amazement ran through the hall. Thomas stiffened beside me. Rebecca straightened in her chair, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. However, I continued, and the hall fell completely silent. I've decided there is something much more valuable I can give them. Thomas looked at me confused. Rebecca slightly furrowed her brow. The most valuable gift I can give them is the truth. The silence in the hall was so deep I could hear my own heart beating. All eyes were fixed on me, waiting for me to continue. Thomas had released my hand and had a confused expression that was quickly transforming into panic. Rebecca remained motionless in her chair, but I could see how her knuckles whitened as she gripped her champagne glass. The truth, I repeated slowly, savoring each word, is something very powerful. And today I have discovered truths that change everything I thought I knew about my own family. I took a sip of champagne, letting the tension build. Some guests began to exchange uncomfortable looks. The wedding photographer had stopped taking pictures and was also watching expectantly. You see, I continued with a serene smile, this morning I woke up without hair. Someone had decided to cut it off completely while I slept and leave me a very revealing note. I took the paper from my purse and unfolded it slowly. The note said, "Now you have the look you deserve. Ridiculous old lady. Enjoy the wedding." A murmur of shock ran through the hall. Several people turned toward Rebecca, who had visibly paled. Thomas stiffened beside me. "Mom," he began to say, but I raised my hand to silence him. "I'm not finished, dear son." My voice remained calm, almost maternal, because it turns out that this act of cruelty led me to discover much more interesting things. I slowly walked around the head table, like a lawyer presenting evidence to a jury. All eyes followed me. For example, I discovered that my son Thomas has been maintaining a secret relationship with Amanda, our former design assistant, for the past few months. The hall erupted in murmurs. Thomas abruptly stood up, knocking over his glass. "Mom, stop." "Why should I stop, Thomas? Isn't it true that you promised Amanda that after getting my shares, you could be together without hiding?" Rebecca had stood up too. Her face was a mask of fury and humiliation. "This is ridiculous. Eleanor is making up lies because she can't accept that Thomas no longer needs her." "Oh dear, Rebecca," I said, turning toward her with an icy smile. "But you have your own secrets too, don't you?" She froze. I could see the fear in her eyes. "Please, tell everyone about your conversation with the divorce lawyer, about how you planned to take half of the shares I was going to transfer today." Rebecca opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her face had gone from white to intense red. "Come on, don't be shy," I encouraged her. "Tell them how you plan to convince Thomas to put me in a nursing home once you had the shares secure." The hall was in absolute silence. Some guests had their mouths open. Others were discreetly recording with their phones. Rebecca's parents had risen from their table and were approaching with expressions of horror. Thomas finally found his voice. "Mom, I don't know where you're getting all this from, but—" "Where am I getting it from?" I interrupted him. "From your own mouth, Thomas. I heard you this morning talking on the phone with Amanda. Every word, every detail of how you plan to use my shares to start a new life with her." Thomas collapsed into his chair, as if the strings holding him up had been cut. His face had lost all color. "And I heard you in the preparation room," I said, turning toward Rebecca, "explaining to your friends how you were going to divorce Thomas once you had access to my company." Rebecca finally exploded. "This is all a lie. This crazy old woman is making everything up because she's jealous that Thomas no longer needs her." "Jealous?" I repeated, and for the first time, my voice rose in tone. "Jealous of what? Exactly?" of having raised a son who conspires to rob me, of having been so foolish as to believe that his love was real. I turned toward the guests, my voice now clear and strong as never before. For 33 years since I became a widow, I have worked day and night to build a successful company. Not for myself, but for my son. I sacrificed relationships, opportunities, my own happiness, everything to ensure that Thomas would never want for anything. Tears began to flow, but they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of liberation. And today I discovered that to him, I am just an obstacle to be removed once I've served my purpose. A ridiculous old lady who can be shaved, humiliated, and finally discarded in a nursing home. Thomas stood up, with tears in his eyes. Mom, please, let me explain. Explain what, Thomas? How do you justify getting married to a woman while planning to leave her for another? Or how you plan to convince me to leave my own company so that you could control it? Rebecca's father approached his daughter. Is what she's saying true? He asked in a broken voice. Rebecca turned to her father, then to Thomas, then to me. For the first time in the 3 years I had known her, she didn't have a ready answer, didn't have a manipulation prepared. This is this is a misunderstanding, she finally stuttered. No, I said with absolute firmness. This is the truth. And the truth is that you two deserve exactly what you're going to receive, nothing. I walked toward the exit of the hall but stopped once more. And about the 40% of the shares, I said, turning toward the couple one last time. That transfer was canceled this morning. Consider it my real wedding gift. The opportunity to build your life together without depending on the money of the ridiculous old lady. The last words I heard as I left the hall were Rebecca's screams and Thomas's desperate pleas. I walked to my car with firm steps, feeling as if I were breathing fresh air for the first time in years. Behind me, I could hear the chaos that had erupted in the hall. Raised voices, chairs being dragged, the sound of glasses breaking. But I was no longer part of that story. As I drove home, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Thomas, Rebecca, unknown numbers that were probably guests wanting to know more details. I turned off the phone and continued driving in silence. What none of them understood was that at that moment, despite the pain and betrayal, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if I had dropped an enormous weight that I had been carrying without realizing it, a weight made of false expectations, unrequited love, unrecognized sacrifices. I arrived home, and for the first time in years, the house truly felt like mine. There was no tension in the air. No need to walk on eggshells to avoid offending Rebecca. No need to pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I sat in my favorite room, the one overlooking the backyard, and took off my wig. My bald head no longer seemed like a symbol of humiliation. It was a symbol of liberation. Rebecca had wanted to humiliate me, but without realizing it, she had given me the final push I needed to see reality. That night I slept better than I had in years. The next day, William arrived early, just as we had agreed. His expression was one of concern, mixed with curiosity. Eleanor, I've been seeing some videos of what happened yesterday on social media, he said as he took out his documents. I'm fine, better than ever, I replied honestly. Did you bring the documents I asked for? Yes, but are you sure about these changes? They're quite dramatic. I confirmed that I was completely sure. My new will was simple. All my fortune and my shares in the company would be divided among 3 charities that helped widowed women start their own businesses. Thomas would not receive a penny. What if Thomas tries to contest the will? William asked. Let him try, I responded. I have recordings of all his conspiratorial conversations. Any judge will understand why I made this decision. Over the following weeks, Thomas tried to contact me constantly. First came desperate pleas, then legal threats, and finally attempts at emotional blackmail. Rebecca also tried to approach me, even appearing at my door crying and asking for forgiveness. Eleanor, please, she begged one afternoon. It was all a misunderstanding. Thomas and I want to start over. We want to have a real relationship with you. I looked at her through the half-open door, without inviting her in. A real relationship? You mean one where you respect me as a human being and not as an ATM or an obstacle to remove? Yes, exactly that, she said with tears running down her cheeks. We've learned our lesson. I'm glad to know you've learned something, I responded calmly, but your education is no longer my responsibility. I closed the door and never opened it again. 2 months later, I learned through mutual acquaintances that Thomas and Rebecca had separated. Apparently, when they realized there would be no shares or inheritance, their life plans quickly crumbled. Thomas had tried to continue his relationship with Amanda, but she had also left him when she discovered he no longer had access to a family fortune. Rebecca had returned to live with her parents, looking for a job for the first time in years. Thomas had had to sell his luxury car and move to a small apartment. I could say I felt satisfaction hearing this, but the truth is, I felt nothing. They were no longer part of my emotional life. Instead, I focused on building a new life for myself. At 63, I decided to do all the things I had postponed for decades because I was busy being the perfect family provider. The first thing I did was buy a piece of land outside the city. I had always dreamed of having a small poultry farm, a place to raise organic chickens and sell fresh eggs. It might sound strange for someone who ran a furniture company valued in the millions, but that had always been my secret dream since childhood, when I visited my grandparents' farm. I hired architects to design modern facilities that respected animal welfare. I researched chicken breeds, sustainable production, local markets. It was like starting over, but this time doing something I was truly passionate about. Something that was for me and not for anyone else. During that time, I also enrolled in painting classes, something I had wanted to do since I was young but never had time for. I discovered I had a natural talent for landscapes. My instructor, a woman my age named Nancy, who had also raised children alone, became a great friend. It's amazing how we bloom when we finally put ourselves first, she said one day as we painted at my new farm. I also began to travel. I visited Italy, France, Japan, all the places I had dreamed of seeing but had always considered too expensive or impractical while I had family responsibilities. On one of those trips to Vermont, I met Harold, a 68-year-old widower who had lost his wife 3 years earlier. It wasn't love at first sight, but something deeper, a mutual recognition. Two people who had dedicated their lives to caring for others and were finally learning to care for themselves. My wife always said that when children grow up, you have to learn again who you are without them. Harold told me one afternoon as we walked through an apple orchard. But I think she was wrong. It's not about going back to who you were. It's about discovering who you can become. Harold was right. I wasn't recovering the Eleanor from before. I was creating a new version of myself. A year after the wedding disaster, I decided to sell the family home. It was too big for me alone, and full of memories that no longer served me. I moved permanently to my farm, where I had built a small but beautiful house, with a perfect art studio for my paintings and a porch where I could sit and watch the sunset. The poultry farm prospered beyond my expectations. My organic eggs became famous in the region. I began offering educational visits for children from local schools. I hired women from the area, especially single mothers and widows, thus creating a small community of mutual support. The day I officially opened my farm to the public, Sunrise Farm Organic Eggs and Chickens, Thomas appeared one last time. "Mom," he said when I saw him standing at the entrance, "can we talk?" I observed him for a long moment. He had lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, looked older than his 34 years. But what struck me most was that his eyes no longer had that calculating coldness I had seen on his wedding day. He looked lost. "Come in," I told him, indicating he should follow me to the house. We sat on the porch, with 2 cups of coffee between us. For a moment, neither of us said anything. "This place is beautiful," he finally said, looking around. "You always talked about having a farm someday, but I never thought you'd make it a reality." "There are many things about me you never knew, Thomas," I replied simply. "I know," he said quietly, "and it's my fault. I was so busy taking everything you gave me that I never stopped to really know you. I took a sip of coffee, waiting for him to continue. I've lost everything, Mom, he confessed. The company is in trouble without your direction. Rebecca left me when she realized there would be no easy money. Amanda disappeared too. And the worst part is that now I understand I deserve everything that has happened to me. For the first time since the wedding, I felt a pang of something resembling maternal compassion, but I was no longer the same woman who would have sacrificed everything to prevent her son from feeling pain. What do you want from me, Thomas? I asked directly. Forgiveness? He answered with tears in his eyes, and a second chance. Not for you to give me money or shares, just to be your son again. I looked into his eyes, searching for the truth behind his words. Was he sincere, or was this another manipulation? Thomas, I told him with gentleness but firmness, you made decisions that broke something irreparable between us. I have learned to live with the consequences of those decisions. Now it's your turn to do the same. But you're my mother, he whispered. I was your mother for 33 years, I replied. I gave you everything I had to give. Now it's your turn to be responsible for your own life, to build something for yourself, without using anyone else as a ladder. Are you saying we can never reconcile? I looked toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set behind the hills. I'm saying that reconciliation doesn't happen with words, but with actions. Show through deeds that you have changed, that you have learned. Maybe with time, we can build a new relationship, but it will never be like before, and you'll have to accept that. It wasn't easy to say those words, but they were necessary, for him and for me. Today, 3 years later, I live a life I couldn't have imagined during all those decades of constant sacrifice. My poultry farm, Sunrise Farm, has become a model of sustainable agriculture in the region. We've expanded to the production of other organic foods and work with local restaurants that value quality and sustainability. I have a team of 15 women, many of them single mothers or widows, who have found in the farm not just a job, but a community. My paintings have sold in several local galleries, and I even had my first solo exhibition last year. Harold and I maintain a long-distance relationship that works perfectly for both of us. We visit each other, travel together, but each maintains our independence. It's an adult relationship based on mutual respect and the desire to share experiences, not on need or dependency. My mornings begin with coffee on my porch, watching the sun rise over the chicken coops. I spend my afternoons supervising the farm or painting, not solving financial problems for adults who should have learned to fend for themselves years ago. And most importantly, when I look in the mirror each morning, I see a woman who finally belongs to herself. My hair has grown back, whiter than before, but I wear it with pride. It's the symbol of my rebirth. And Thomas? Little by little, he's been rebuilding his life. He found a job at another furniture company, starting from the bottom. He moved to a modest but dignified apartment. 6 months ago, he invited me to dinner to introduce me to Kate, his new girlfriend, a hard-working woman without pretensions who seems genuinely interested in getting to know me. Our relationship will never be what it was, but we're building something new, something based on mutual respect rather than dependency. It's a work in progress, day by day. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my porch watching the sunset, I think about that day I woke up without hair. At that moment, I felt it as the worst humiliation of my life. Now I see it as the turning point I needed to wake up, to see the reality of my situation, and take control of my destiny. It's curious how sometimes we need to lose something. Hair, relationships, expectations to truly find ourselves. At 66, I've learned that it's never too late to start again. It's never too late to set boundaries, to value yourself, to build the life you truly desire, not the one others expect of you. That morning of the wedding, when I looked in the mirror and saw my bald head, I thought my life was over. Now I know it was just beginning. And if there's something I would like to tell other women who find themselves trapped in lives that no longer belong to them, it's this. True love, including maternal love, doesn't mean allowing yourself to be used. It means loving yourself enough to set boundaries, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts, because sometimes it's precisely that pain that sets us free.